The Ghostbusters have encountered a lot of terrifying ghosts over the past 40 years, from Slimers and terror dogs to giant stay-puffed marshmallow men. And with the next film, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, set to open next year, I think we better prepare ourselves by dusting off the old Tobin Spirit Guide and exploring each and every goblin, spook, and demon the Ghostbusters have encountered, just in case they pop their ugly heads back up. During a trip down into the old subway tunnels while searching for the River of Slime, the Ghostbusters decide to have a little fun shouting off into the distance, hearing their own echoes, except for Winston, who instead gets his name called by some unforeseen entity. The disembodied voice is a simple Class 1 specter, capable of nothing more than creating sounds or simple lights. Fans have speculated that the voice may be from Vigo the Carpathian, but this has never been proven. The scene is a spoof from an old 1943 film called Ghosts on the Loose, where a spooky echo haunts the boys in the film. Director Ivan Reitman is said to have done the voice, but even he seems unsure when he said, "I think that might be me. I always did the deep voices."
Hello?
Once the Ghostbusters are back in business, they deal with a haunting at a local Orifor's crystal store in New York. Some ghosts are simply making some of the expensive crystal float in the air, giving the Ghostbusters the opportunity to try out some new trapping system. A Class 2 haunting, but nothing to worry about. The spirits are harmless and a minor nuisance. While Dana Baird attempts to give her son Oscar a bath, their bathtub begins to fill with negatively charged psychomagnetheric slime. The tub then lunges for Dana and Oscar as she runs with her son in her arms. As a Class 2 entity, the tub is only able to be manipulated, but beyond that it really doesn't pose much of a threat, although it did try to eat Oscar. In original concepts of the bathtub, it was going to be similar to Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. Bubbles from the bath would rise up, forming a face which would try to attack Dana and Oscar, but she would disperse the bubbles when throwing a plugged-in hairdryer into the tub. When Ivan Reitman first read the scene, it reminded him of David Cronenberg's first film called Shivers, which he had worked on. In the film, a woman is attacked by a parasitic creature in a bathtub. The tub itself was made out of a white silicone, which looked like porcelain when it was slimed up, but would bend when the slime creature inside was operated like a hand puppet. After the abandoned tunnel called Winston's name, the Ghostbusters were about to leave and grab their proton packs until they became surrounded by the grisly visage of heads on stakes. Another Class 2 entity, while harmless, was quite terrifying and used as a means of stopping the Ghostbusters from reaching the River of Slime. Pam Easley, known as the Zombie Wrangler, placed calls around New York looking for deadheads. Some were purchased and others were made by Rick Lazzarini. The better looking heads were placed in the foreground, with the less detailed ones placed in the background. One of the heads used for the scene was sculpted by Adam Jones, who would end up being the guitarist for Tool. During the Somerville cross rip of 2021, a minor ghost is manifested at Spinner's Roller Hop, where it's served coffee before the waitress realizes it's not of this plane of existence. A Class 3 Spectre, these are distinct in human form and personality. If their identity becomes known, then they are then reassigned to a Class 4. These Spectres also have more defensive capabilities than previous known entities. The minor ghost is an homage to the taxi driver ghost from the original film. There were unused concepts for other minor ghosts that were going to be included based on what they were carrying, like dynamite and shovel. Arian Tootin, creature designer and special effects artist for the film, just had to have a live-action ghoul that would be as cool as the taxi driver. He found an old skeleton he had laying around in the shop and mechanized it, along with building it up with extra latex foam he had laying around from the terror dogs. During the events that took place New Year's Eve 1989, the doomed vessel the Titanic made its arrival at Pier 34 in New York City. The ship itself a mangled wreck, and the passengers all ghostly manifestations. The entire thing was witnessed by the dock supervisor and his assistant, who reported the incident to the police. A series of Class 3 ghosts, they pose no real threat, but could cause a minor nuisance. Harold Ramis and others had thought of other large manifestations that could be happening as the dead would start returning to New York City. One idea was the Hindenburg arriving with flaming passengers and a ghostly subway station with ghoul-like commuters. The dock supervisor in this scene is played by Cheech Marin. A model of the ship was built with a much larger hull than what the actual Titanic had, which was done for dramatic purposes. Extras were given period-accurate clothing and were filmed against a black backdrop, and then they were inserted optically against the model ship.
Well, better late than never.
While the Ghostbusters slept in the firehouse, Ray has an encounter with the Dream Ghost, which appears to perform a certain kind of act. In a deleted scene, the Ghostbusters investigate Fort Detmering, where the Dream Ghost resides. The ghost is rumored to be the ghost of an officer's girlfriend when the fort was fully functional. The Dream Ghost seems to frequent many rooms inside the fort, especially the officer's room, and it's said that anyone who enters these rooms becomes extremely tired, as if they haven't slept for days. Upon leaving the rooms, however, the effect is completely reversed. The ghost can only manifest in the real world while someone is asleep. However, after much research, the Ghostbusters concluded the ghost was of no threat and left it alone, although Ray does continue to monitor the fort on a regular basis, for science. The Dream Ghost is a Class 3 ghost and offers no threat to anyone that comes in contact with it. In early drafts of the script, the ghost was set up to be Ray's love interest, with Ray admitting that he was in love with the Spectre. During a trip to Central Park, the Ghostbusters encounter a dead jogger who terrorizes everyone as he runs by. Often shoving people as he runs, the Ghostbusters deal with this entity by simply placing a trap in its path and capturing it as it attempts to run by. A Class 3 ghost who isn't really a threat to anyone, but can be a nuisance with how rude he is if you're in his way. It's rumored the ghost died after having a heart attack during one of his runs while still living. Jim Fye played the Jogger Ghost. He was covered in white makeup and filmed against a blue backdrop, which was then composited against the live-action background. After the containment unit holding all the ghosts the Ghostbusters captured was shut off and ruptured, one of the escaped spirits entered a New York taxicab where it drove its passenger to his destination like a madman, causing other cars to crash. The ghost consistently manifests on Madison Avenue and always in a taxicab. Because of its random manifestations, it proved to be rather difficult to capture. Some have speculated that it may be a driver from the fleet that started in 1897, while others believe the spirit to be the result of a fatal accident which occurred in the 1950s when a driver drove into the Harlem River. As a Class 3 entity, the zombie taxi driver only manifests when in a taxicab and itself doesn't pose much of a threat, but when it drives, it can be a danger for other motorists on the road. Special effects artist Steve Johnson was basically given the task of creating the zombie taxi driver as his job interview. 2 weeks before they were set for filming, they needed the animatronic, so Steve was asked to build it, and because it worked out so well for the shoot, he was given the job. After the events of the ghoulish heads, the Ghostbusters are confronted by a ghost train. While Ray and Egon get to cover, Winston is frozen by fear as the train and its passengers pass straight through him. Egon believes the train is the old New York Central City of Albany, which derailed in 1920 and took with it over 100 innocent souls. A Class 3 entity, the train poses no real threat besides scaring anyone that may be caught in its path. Ernie Hudson, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis all filmed against interactive lighting in a New York nightclub called The Tunnel. The actors were hit with extremely bright lights, taking the place of the train and air cannons which blew Ernie Hudson's helmet off. As purely a coincidence, in the original film, a news reporter talks about a spectral locomotive his grandmother said would rocket past the farm where she grew up. Fiorella LaGuardia was a New York mayor from 1934 to 1946. During the events of New Year's Eve 1989, he appeared before current Mayor Lenny, speaking to him for over an hour. Fiorella is a Class 4 ghost, but completely harmless and simply needs to cross over.
I spent an hour last night in my bedroom talking to Fiorella LaGuardia, and he's been dead for 40 years.
At the New York Public Library, a librarian named Alice comes face to face with the library ghost. The ghost terrified her, and when the Ghostbusters arrived, prior to becoming the Ghostbusters, they were told it had arms and reached for her. Many people claim to have seen the ghost, with it even blowing books off the bookshelves some 20 feet away. When the Ghostbusters encounter the ghost, Peter tries speaking to it only for it to shush him. Not wanting to give up without making contact, Ray came up with a plan and told the others to follow his lead. Ray suddenly shouts, "Get her," and the ghost transforms into a much more terrifying entity. The library ghost, also known as Eleanor Twitty, was the head librarian of the New York Public Library until her untimely murder in March of 1924. A Class 4 entity, even though she can appear to be extremely terrifying, this is mostly a defense mechanism, and if left alone, she'll simply just read her books. Ruth Oliver played the library ghost and filmed her scene at the Entertainment Effects Group facility. Ivan Reitman wanted her transparency to fluctuate, so they shot her against a black backdrop, and when she was inserted into the scene, it made parts of her look non-existent, especially her legs, which completely dissolved. The demonic version of the ghost was a puppet made of foam latex and PVC pipe, and was later repurposed for the 1985 horror film Fright Night.
Get her!
After collecting negatively charged psychomagnetheric slime from the depths of New York City, the Ghostbusters are arrested and put on trial. The judge ends up losing his cool, which charges the slime, causing the release of the Scoleri brothers. This leads the Ghostbusters to put the proton packs back on after a 5-year hiatus and capture the rampaging spirits. The Scoleri brothers were part of a crime organization, with their mother Mama Scoleri being the brains of the operation. The two brothers were charged with murder by Judge Wexler and were put to death by electric chair. The Scoleri brothers are Class 4 entities requiring immediate capture, as they can be potentially deadly. The Scoleri brothers were loosely based on the Blues Brothers, and effects artist Tim Lawrence designed them as such. Ivan Reitman was afraid that the designs would be too over the top, but producer Michael C. Gross felt their design would help to lighten the moment. In various offshoots of the film, such as the trading cards, the Scoleri brothers were able to shoot lightning from their fingers. They were rumored to appear in the 2008 game, but were never added.
Wow!
Vigo the Carpathian is a 16th century sorcerer and tyrant, responsible for the deaths of countless people. He died at the ripe old age of 105 after being poisoned, shot, stabbed, hung, stretched, disemboweled, and drawn and quartered. Before his head died, he claimed he would return, and in 1989, a painting of Vigo began to gain power from the river of slime growing beneath the city. Attempting to regain human form, he attempted to transfer his soul into the body of Dana Barrett's son Oscar, until he was thwarted by the Ghostbusters, who sent him flying back into the painting and destroying it for good. Vigo is a Class 4 entity, as he's a ghost with a confirmed identity. However, he is extremely powerful and can even rival some Class 7 entities such as Gozer the Gozerian. Dealing with Vigo head-on is ill-advised, and the better route is to simply prevent him from entering this plane of existence before he can attempt to regain his power. Vigo is loosely based on Vlad the Impaler and Carpathian mythology. Concept art for Vigo showed him as a robed sorcerer, almost priest-like in appearance. William von Humberg played the part of Vigo, with Max von Sydow providing his voice.
What? Who?
I, Vigo, the Scourge of Carpathia.
While Phoebe and Podcast are testing their newly discovered proton packs, they find a ghost at the local foundry named Muncher. After nearly catching the ghost, it escaped back to town, where it was found eating a fire hydrant. The kids give chase to the ghost, eventually capturing him before he can reach the Shandor mine. The kids were apprehended by the police along with the ghost trap housing Muncher. Muncher would later be freed from the trap so Phoebe and Podcast could retrieve the confiscated ghost catching equipment and help prevent the coming of Gozer. Muncher is a Class 5 free-floating specter who feasts on metal. He can be quite dangerous when confronted, being able to spit out shards of metal it has consumed at anyone who attempts to capture it. Director Jason Reitman described Muncher as a weird little bulldog-like coin purse, and they had hundreds of concept designs for it. Eventually, visual effects supervisor Sheena Douglas showed Jason Reitman photos of water bears, and he became so captivated that they went with that as an inspiration. The Frog Ghost is a Class 5 specter with very little known about it. At one point, it was going to be part of the subway scene in Ghostbusters 2, but was removed as Ivan Reitman didn't think it was scary enough to be included. As a result of the containment unit exploding, the subway ghost was one of many previously caught ghosts released back into the world. It likes to emerge from the subway from time to time, frightening any passerby with its flailing arms and tentacled face. Despite being a Class 5 manifestation, it doesn't appear to be violent, but more of a nuisance. Immediate capture of the ghost is often suggested. The original design of the ghost had 3 heads, but was deemed to be too expensive to build for something that was only going to be shown briefly. The mini puffs made their appearance inside a Walmart, causing chaos no different than the average Walmart shopper, and they return later during the climactic battle, where Podcast has to fend them off with a PKA meter that now also doubles as a taser. They somewhat resemble the original Stay Puft, but lack the sailor collar and tie. Their hats are also missing the Stay Puft text. The mini puffs are a Class 5 manifestation of Gozer and are more annoying than anything. They can be dispatched fairly easily with or without the use of ghost-busting equipment. When writing the film, Jason Reitman didn't want to do a third large destructive entity and instead created these gremlin-like creatures who are interested in destroying everything, including themselves. The moving picture company modeled their behavior after that of toddlers to get the right clumsiness and cuteness they were looking for. There's a deleted scene with the mini puffs that take place inside the hardware store where the mini puffs were going to shoot a nail gun, but it was removed for seeming to be a little too violent. During the Somerville cross rip, a flaming phantasm can be seen chasing after people on the streets. A Class 5 vaporous apparition, it can be extremely dangerous considering its body is comprised of fire and it should be handled with extreme caution. Paulo Ghiandoso was asked to design a ghost that would manifest inside a fire station and scare all the firefighters. He came up with several concepts of fiery ghosts, including a possessed mascot costume and the flaming ghost of a firefighter who had taken his own life after being disfigured by a fire. During the events of New Year's Eve 1989, the Washington Square ghost manifested at the Victory Arch in Washington Square, causing people to abandon their cars and run in terror. The Washington Square ghost is a Class 5 phantasm with not much known about it. Due to its size and ferocious nature, however, it's safe to say that it's most likely deadly and recommended that people stay away. Phil Tippett, a stop-motion animator, agreed to create the puppet, but only for 160 frames and if it was done in one take. He built the ghost, shot it, and delivered it one day early, and because he was only doing this one shot, he asked that he not be given credit. In 2016, the puppet went up for sale at auction for $2,500, but it didn't end up selling. The Bug-Eye Ghost appears during the Somerville cross rip, flinging its eye out to peek as the rest of its body plays catch-up. A Class 5 entity, the Bug-Eye Ghost appears to be rather harmless and more mischievous than anything. Still, it's advised that you stay away and let the professionals capture the ghost. The Bug-Eye Ghost is based on the Kenner toy from the real Ghostbusters toy line and was added to the film during the delay caused by a certain 2020 virus. On New Year's Eve 1989, moviegoers were terrified and chased out of a special showing of Cannibal Girls by the movie theater ghost. The ghost features 6 yellow eyes, demonic wings, and 2 arms, each with 2 forearms and 2 hands. The theater ghost is a Class 5 entity that manifests in and around movie theaters, scaring anyone and everyone away from the premises. 4 puppeteers in total were needed to operate the puppet, while they all wore completely black outfits and shot against a black backdrop. The biggest hurdle they ran into was operating the puppet at 48 frames per second, so it would look smooth when placed against the real footage. Slimer is the first ghost caught by the Ghostbusters. Known to all the staff at the Sedgwick Hotel, management had enough of this little slime ball and called in the Ghostbusters. After the first few attempts were unsuccessful, they cornered Slimer in the ballroom where they caused massive damage and eventually caught the exhausted apparition. Slimer would later escape during the containment unit explosion and would later cause more havoc on the streets of New York. 5 years later, Slimer would return, this time with Louis Tully trying to capture him, that is until Janine tells him Slimer is nothing to worry about. Later, Slimer would drive the bus that picks up Louis as a way to mend their previous misunderstanding. Slimer is a Class 5 free-roaming vapor and a nasty one too. Though not very dangerous, he can be pretty destructive and will eat just about anything in sight. Steve Johnson spent 6 months working on Slimer, going through hundreds of designs and sculpts. They first asked for a smile with arms and kept nitpicking what they wanted or didn't want. The day before the final design needed to be submitted, they told Steve it had to look like John Belushi. So with a stack of headshots of John and some cocaine, Steve got to work. In a cocaine-induced bit of paranoia, Steve thought the ghost of Belushi had arrived to help him with the final product. He claims the ghost left and told him to stop with the cocaine because it'll end up killing him. The next day the design was submitted and it was approved. 3 Slimers in total were created to do various tasks, and a miniature one was created for flying shots, but it didn't work out, so they used a green peanut instead.
Don't move. It won't hurt you.
While ghosts rampaged throughout New York, the slime began to rise, causing one woman who was wearing a mink coat to walk through it. The mink coat came to life and tried attacking the woman, who immediately took it off. As the coat ran down the street, it terrorized anyone it passed by. The Mink Coat is a Class 6 manifestation, which are ghosts from lower life forms. In an early draft for the original film, the Mink Coat springs to life during a fashion show after the containment unit is shut down. The terror dogs, Zuul and Vinz Clortho, prior to the Ghostbusters, were worshippers and minions of Gozer. They were worshipped by the Sumerians, Mesopotamians, and Hittites as demigods in 6000 BC. In order for Gozer to walk the human world, both beasts were needed to open a gateway, one the gatekeeper Zuul, and the other the keymaster Vinz Clortho. Both entities needed human bodies in order to open the gateway, and in 1984, as immense spiritual energies began to spike, Zuul would take on the body of Dana Barrett, and Vinz Clortho the body of Louis Tully. The two would copulate and open the gateway for Gozer to return, only for the Ghostbusters to close the gateway by crossing their proton streams, which was a very dangerous measure. The two beasts would return in 2021, once again taking the bodies of 2 innocents, one Callie Spengler being taken by Zuul, and Vinz Clortho taking Gary Guberson. Both terror dogs are Class 6 entities, however they are extremely dangerous and it is best to trap them as soon as they appear. Zuul tends to be more seductive and is known to be female as it possesses female hosts. Vinz Clortho, on the other hand, is a bit more dim-witted, having confused Zuul with a horse once. He is also seen as male with longer horns and a bit more aggressive in how he possesses someone, lacking the stealthy approach that Zuul uses. The original design of Vinz Clortho was shorter and fatter because at the time, they still thought John Candy would be playing the role of Louis Tully. Zuul attacked Egon in the film Afterlife the same way it did Dana Barrett in the original film. The design of the terror dogs went through many incarnations, from spiny hammerhead creatures to designs that almost looked like dragons. Eventually, Tom Enriquez came up with the approved look of the monsters, and Kurt Connor made the original sculpt, which was refined a bit more by Randall William Cook, a sculptor and stop-motion artist. During the climactic events of 1984, Gozer gave the Ghostbusters the choice to choose the form of their destructor, with Ray unwittingly choosing that of the Stay-Puffed Marshmallow Man. The giant Stay Puffed would wreak destruction upon the city of New York until the Ghostbusters managed to reverse the doorway that brought Gozer, causing a massive explosion and turning Stay Puffed into a big puddle of melted marshmallow. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is a Class 7 entity, and it's best to try and keep it from existing in the first place rather than trying to defeat it once it's been summoned. In an early draft, Stay Puft was actually a throwaway character that would appear at the halfway point of the film. It wasn't until later that he was moved up to being in the finale. In every version of the script until the very final one, Winston is actually the one responsible for conjuring up Stay Puft instead of Ray. The Stay Puft suit was made from a pileable foam that could move and a fiberglass head that had cable mechanisms that would operate facial movement. They originally used a soft foam, but Bill Bryan, who built and wore the suits, noticed when he walked towards the camera and the legs rubbed together, it looked like a certain part of the female anatomy, so they had to scrap it. In total, 18 suits were created, costing somewhere around $20,000 to $35,000 each, and of the 18 suits created, 17 of them were burned during filming.
It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
In the early 20th century, a cult of Gozer worshippers led by Ivo Shandor felt humanity was too sick to survive. He built a mechanism atop 550 Central Park West with the intention of pulling in and concentrating spiritual turbulence, or a gateway to bring about the return of Gozer. As ghosts started appearing more and more, signifying the return of Gozer, the gatekeeper and keymaster opened the doorway, allowing Gozer to finally make its return. After taking the form of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, the Ghostbusters managed to close the doorway and destroy Gozer, or so it seemed. In 2021, Gozer would make yet another return in the small town of Somerville, only to be thwarted once again by the Ghostbusters, this time being trapped seemingly for good, as not only was Gozer caught in the traps, but also Vince Clortho and Zuul, both of which are necessary in bringing about Gozer's return. Gozer is a Class 7 being and an interdimensional god, an extremely powerful and evil force hell-bent on the destruction and takeover of Earth. Gozer sees anyone and everyone as beneath it, and nothing more than a potential sacrifice. Even Ivo Shandor, who built various temples to honor Gozer, wasn't above being torn to pieces, as Gozer holds no loyalty to anyone or anything. Gozer was named after several things according to Dan Aykroyd. First was a car dealership in upstate New York that was named Gozer, and also the Enfield haunting, which Poltergeist was loosely based on. During the Enfield case, a medium or psychic moaned Gozer repeatedly while in a trance. In an early draft of the script, Gozer was going to arrive as the form of Ivo Shandor, who was going to be played by Paul Rubens. Gozer then was described as a kindly-looking man in a suit and tie. Gozer was also going to take a second form after Staypuft, but the idea was scrapped. Slavica Jovan played the original Gozer, but because of her thick Slavic accent, she was dubbed over by Patty Edwards. Gozer is one of the most iconic antagonists in the Ghostbusters series, and remember, if someone asks if you're a god, just say yes.
Are you a god?
Lastly, and most importantly, we have one of the Ghostbusters themselves, Egon Spengler. One of the founders of the Ghostbusters and primary designer of their equipment, Egon Spengler would sort of drift away from the other Ghostbusters after the events of 1989. Egon began investigating what he thought could be a world-ending event. This drove even longtime friend Ray away from him, as even he thought Egon was acting a little too spooky. One day, Egon took the Ecto-1, his proton pack, and all the traps and just left, which effectively killed the Ghostbusters operations completely. He ended up in a small farmhouse in Somerville where he investigated the old Shandor mine, finding a temple dedicated to Gozer beneath. During the summer of 2021, Egon captured terror dog Vince Clortho, and upon returning to the farm, he was followed by Zuul. Unable to capture Zuul because of a lack of power, his trap didn't work. Eventually, Zuul would get the better of Egon, killing him after causing a massive heart attack. A short while later, Egon's daughter and grandkids move in, where his spirit begins communicating with his youngest grandchild, Phoebe, in an attempt to make her aware of the coming threat. This all culminates when Gozer returns, and Egon's spirit assists Phoebe and the remaining Ghostbusters in defeating the interdimensional being. Egon Spengler is a Class 4 spirit with a heart of gold. He stuck around long enough to help prevent the rise of Gozer and say goodbye to his friends, his family, and the Ghostbusters fans. Egon Spengler was played by the late and great Harold Ramis, who passed away February 24th, 2014. The ghost of Egon was created using various angles of Harold from the previous films, and with computers they aged him up and made him look how Egon may have looked at the time of his passing. For the body of Egon, they hired actor Bob Gunton of Shawshank Redemption fame, and even original Ghostbusters director Ivan Reitman did some work as a stand-in for Ghost Egon. No matter how much time passes, he may be gone, but he won't be forgotten. Well, that's every ghost that the Ghostbusters have had to deal with at some point in time. Well, the ones that were documented anyways. Maybe in the upcoming film we'll see some familiar faces. I'm hoping to see Slimer at least once. Anyways, Ghostbusters fans, that's all for today. Let me know down in the comments what some of your favorite ghosts are from this series. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in the next video.